Hello and welcome. I'm an AI expert in modern hospitality operations, and I'm delighted to welcome all students of Europe Hotel School to this online learning journey. We're here to support your professional growth, and together, we're going to dive into one of the most critical leadership skills you'll ever need in this industry.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with what I call the crisis after the crisis. Then we'll define what a debrief really is. From there, we'll look at healing the human element, rebuilding a united team, and finally, how you can turn a challenging experience into true excellence.
All right, let's dive right in. Our first stop is this critical and, often completely overlooked phase. What actually happens to your team after the operational side of a crisis is over?
This quote really gets to the heart of it. You see, on the surface, everything might look like it's back to normal. The emergency is handled, guests have moved on. But for your team, their internal experience is a whole different story. The logistical part might be over, but the human response, well, that's just getting started.
Think about it for a second. Our minds don't just have an off switch for stress. Once all that adrenaline fades away, it leaves behind this residue. It's made of fatigue, emotional tension, and a lot of quiet reflection. People start replaying events, maybe second-guessing their own decisions. And if you ignore these invisible layers, they don't just vanish. They get pushed down, and that's where they can really start to damage morale and performance later on.
So, the big question is, how do you handle this hidden aftermath? Well, that brings us to what is probably the single most powerful tool you have for managing the human side of a crisis, the debriefing.
And listen, this is the key distinction you have to understand. A debriefing is not just another meeting. It's not the time for reports, it's not for pointing fingers, and it's definitely not for correcting mistakes. It is a carefully guided, safe space for your team to just pause, reflect, and reconnect with each other as people who've just been through something intense. Its real purpose is to help everyone find their way back to a little emotional clarity.
Which brings us to the why, right? Why is doing this so incredibly important? Let's take a closer look at the core purpose of a debrief, because it is all about healing the human element of your team.
During any crisis, people suppress a lot of feelings, fear, confusion, even doubt, all in the name of being professional. A debrief gives your team permission to finally let that out, to talk about it without any fear of judgment. And when people can share that burden, it reduces their internal stress, it helps restore their emotional balance, and it gives them back a feeling of relief and control.
Now, the absolute cornerstone to making this work is validation. As a leader, this doesn't mean you have to agree with every single thing that was done. Not at all. It simply means you acknowledge that each person's experience, their perspective, was real and important to them. That simple act of respect, that's what builds the trust you need for people to be truly honest.
Okay, so once individuals start to feel heard and begin that healing process, we can zoom out and shift the focus to the team as a whole. Let's look at how a good debrief can transform all those separate individual experiences into a new kind of collective strength.
You have to remember, during a crisis, everybody has a pretty narrow view of what's happening. The front desk agent is totally focused on calming down guests. Meanwhile, security is coordinating safety protocols, and engineering is trying to fix a technical problem. Everyone has their piece of the puzzle. The debrief is where you finally bring all those pieces together. And when that happens, the team gets the full picture, and that builds incredible empathy and a real shared understanding.
And this is where the real magic happens. A debrief brings the invisible contributions into the light. It's not just about who followed procedure correctly. It's about the colleague who kept their cool under immense pressure. It's about the agent who took a moment to comfort a terrified guest, or the manager who quietly gave a reassuring word to a struggling teammate. These are the quiet acts of humanity that actually hold a team together, and they have to be recognized.
So this process of healing and reconnecting, it's not just about feelings. It also creates a powerful, direct bridge to operational improvement. In our last section, let's look at exactly how the insights you gain from a debrief can be used to make your entire operation better.
But first, a critical warning. You must, and I mean you must, keep the debrief separate from any kind of correction or evaluation. The moment you introduce criticism into this space, you will shut down communication. It'll happen instantly. The goal here is open sharing. Any improvements or training adjustments, they have to be handled later in a completely different setting.
Once you've created that safe space for open sharing, the path to improvement almost reveals itself. Your team will tell you where the gaps were. Maybe the radios were unreliable, or maybe the chain of command wasn't clear. These are priceless, real-world insights.
You can then take that information to identify flaws in your systems, refine your training protocols, and make sure those lessons are documented for the future.
And this all leads to a fundamental truth. Drills and simulations are absolutely essential. We know that. But they can never truly replicate the emotional weight and the chaos of a real crisis. When you incorporate the lessons from a real event back into your training, you make it so much more realistic, relevant, and effective. You're preparing your team not just for the procedures, but for the human reality of the next challenge. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. A crisis, at some point, is inevitable, but a broken team is not. By focusing on the human side of recovery, you don't just fix what went wrong. You build a team that's more resilient, more connected, and more capable than it was before. The real question is, as a future leader, how will you turn your team's next challenge into its greatest strength?